afternoon session. We've got two more theses today. We've had some really strong ones so far. And so we're going to start We've got Gabe and Nadine this afternoon, so we'll start with Gabe. I don't know what to say about Gabe. He's sort of a quiet student that keeps to himself. Is that sarcasm? Sarcasm. That was sarcasm. But he's brought some fun to class, maybe fun or chaos. I'm not sure which one. Gabe says this. He says, "I would like to thank God for allowing me to get to this point, and for everything that has happened that has led me to this point. My teachers, Mr. Wade and Miss May, for teaching me throughout this entire process. My advisor, Mr. Minnow, for assisting me throughout my thesis. My panelists who have graciously spared their time to discuss my thesis, and my parents. And finally, I want to thank myself for actually doing the thesis and memorizing it instead of sleeping." Its title is UN Uninvolved in Conflict: How the Veto Causes the Paralysis of the United Nations Security Council. Give me a second to set up the timer, and I'll tell you when you can start. Okay, you can. Gabe, are you okay?
Wait, what?
Are you okay?
I can start.
Okay, you can start when you're ready.
Wait, hold on. Oh. Yeah, okay.
This is all on tape.
Oh.
Recorded.
Oh, do I need to wait for you to say you can start? Oh, okay. In the middle of a battlefield in Ukraine, Donetsk, a soldier approaches the body of an enemy that had just been killed. As he searches for the body, he finds a photo of a man with his children. At that moment, the soldier realized that the man that he had just killed was a father, one that had a family waiting for him back home. Realizing what he just did, the soldier breaks down in tears as he remembers that he too has his own family waiting on his return. Gaza, Iran, Ukraine. Thousands of people die to conflict, and millions are displaced every year for the same reason. And yet, the United Nations Security Council just watches. Not because it lacks the power to intervene, but rather because a mechanism known as the veto system paralyzes it. Set in place by its original founders, the veto is a power given exclusively to the 5 permanent members of the organization. The veto has the ability to override the wishes of the entire international community, putting the UNSC itself in a deadlock during humanitarian crises. In a world where conflict is deadlier than it has ever been, the paralysis of the UNSC is not just a minor problem that can be ignored, but a terrifying danger towards everyone in the world. But why exactly was the UNSC founded? And more importantly, why would its creators implement such a precarious system? Understanding the mandate and mission of the UNSC are important, as originally the organization was designed to prevent another catastrophe like World War II from happening again. Over time, however, the veto transformed itself, turning itself from a safeguard into a mechanism that allows the P5 to prioritize their national interest over our safety. After the catastrophe of World War I, countries around the world realized the need for a governing body that could prevent such tragedies from happening again. This led to the creation of the League of Nations. Unfortunately, however, the League failed at stopping multiple major conflicts, most notably the Japanese invasion of Manchuria, the annexation of Poland, and the Italian-Ethiopian War. Due to these failures, the US, UK, and Russia, or the USSR at the time, got together and discussed a replacement for the organization. And so, after the end of World War II in 1945, the UN was officially established along with one of its main principal organs, the United Nations Security Council, whose job, as its name would state, was to protect the security and peace around the world. It was leader of the USSR, Joseph Stalin, who heavily insisted on the addition of a veto system, which would have allowed major powers to completely block a topic from being discussed. The final decision regarding the veto was made during the Yalta Conference, in which the veto would be included within the UNSC. However, its influence would only be able to be given to the 5 permanent countries of the organization, the US, Russia, UK, China, and France, and it would only be able to block resolutions rather than completely stopping a topic from being discussed. Since then, the veto was used extensively, especially during the Cold War, in which the US and Russia would constantly veto each other's resolutions and resolutions made regarding them or their allies. Even though the UNSC has 15 members, only 5 of them get to possess the veto power. This imbalance of power has caused the UNSC to completely stay paralyzed during international crises. According to the UNSC database itself, over 329 vetoes have been made since 1946, and the US and Russia alone account for 70% of these vetoes. Once again, this imbalance of power has caused the organization to stay completely inactive during international crises. With the knowledge that the veto causes the paralysis of the UNSC, many have argued against its existence and have called for reform. Without a doubt, the veto has caused more harm than has caused good, preventing countless resolutions that had the potential to save millions of innocent lives. The veto paralyzes the UNSC, causing the organization to be a danger to everyone in the world, and it needs to be reformed for 3 main reasons. First, the UNSC is paralyzed by the veto during international crises, causing it to be a danger to everyone. The veto causes the UNSC to lose its legitimacies, and the veto affects not just the UNSC, but other bodies as well. The first major issue with the veto is not that it simply delays action, but it fundamentally changes the purpose of the UNSC itself, turning the peacekeeping organization into an arena, one where the P5 battle for their national interest instead of humanitarian action. First of all, the biggest reason supporting veto reform is because the veto's existence paralyzes the UNSC during international crises, causing the organization to be a danger to everyone, every country, every nation on Earth. China has repeatedly used the veto to veto multiple resolutions that were made to support countries who coincidentally recognized Taiwan. In both Macedonia and Guatemala, China was able to veto resolutions that had nothing to do with international security, rather simply just to pressure these countries politically. Not only were these vetoes both completely unrelated to peacekeeping, they were completely unjustifiable ones to begin with. The history of the veto constantly shows the P5 abusing the veto for their own good instead of focusing on humanitarian action. China, once again, along with Russia, have blocked multiple investigations regarding Syria's use of chemical weapons, human rights abuses during the Syrian civil war. The decision of a single country has the ability to obstruct ceasefires, deny humanitarian aid, and stop humanitarian action during times of crises, putting millions of innocent lives at risk. Continuing on with the problems of the veto, it lies in the fact that the veto ensures no accountability will be held by the P5 or their allies. The clearest example of this is the previously mentioned Russia-Ukraine war. Despite overwhelming evidence of attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure, the UNSC has taken almost no meaningful action regarding it because Russia just simply vetoes any resolution made against it. Had a non-P5 country committed these crimes, they would be sanctioned, investigated immediately, and their leaders would most definitely be tried as war criminals. Russia, however, is not the only country guilty of this, as the US have done the same thing in regards to the Israel-Gaza conflict, vetoing multiple ceasefires and stopping them from being accessed. Just to highlight how badly the veto was abused by the US, more than a third of US vetoes were used just for Israel. These cases reveal a repeating pattern, one where the veto ends up shielding powerful countries and their allies from accountability, while at the same time, nothing can be done about it, leaving them completely scot-free to commit even more of these heinous actions. Lastly, the veto creates what experts call is a pocket veto. Essentially, the mere threat of a veto discourages members of the UNSC from even proposing a resolution in the first place because they are already scared of failure. In the end, the UNSC ends up becoming inactive before discussions even begin. If the UNSC is unable to act against conflicts while they're still emerging, then peaceful intervention becomes impossible. The UNSC ends up failing its core purpose of preventing conflict before it even arises. The second major issue regarding the veto lies in the fact that it causes damage to the credibility and legitimacy of the UNSC. The UN was built upon the core values of democracy, equality, and cooperation between nations. And yet, the veto completely contradicts all of these values by placing immense power in the hands of only 5 countries. The second important reason as to why the veto needs to be reformed is because the veto causes the UN Security Council and the UN to lose their legitimacies. First of all, the veto causes a lack of democratic legitimacy within the UNSC. The UN Charter supposedly states that all nations are equal sovereigns, and yet only 5 of them get to possess the veto power. When a single vote can invalidate every other vote in the process, the vote can no longer truly be called a democratic one. This issue can clearly be seen during the Gaza ceasefires, in which nearly every member of the UNSC voted for these ceasefires. Unfortunately, a single US veto was able to stop these ceasefires. Experts have criticized the veto for decades, stating that it contradicts the UN's own principles of equality and democracy. Along with the democratic legitimacy, the veto also causes a lack of representational legitimacy within the United Nations Security Council, as it reflects the geopolitical realities of 1945 rather than the modern world. Africa and South America have no permanent representation within the UNSC, despite the fact that a majority of missions from the UNSC take place there. African governments and countries like Brazil have constantly called for reform and expanded permanent membership. Critics argue that the current structure of the UNSC makes it appear biased towards a few countries, while at the same time ignoring other larger parts of the world. Last of all, the veto causes the UNSC to lack the authority to be a peacekeeping organization. The P5 have repeatedly used the veto to stop action in cases of war crimes, humanitarian crises, and genocide. As a result, many countries have increasingly viewed the UNSC as an ineffective organization. If the UNSC is unable to act against the most powerful nations, then it loses credibility as the protector of us like weaker nations. And hence, the UNSC ends up becoming another body trapped by political deadlock. The damage with the veto doesn't stop with the UNSC, as over time its influence has spread outside the organization and has begun affecting other bodies connected to the UNSC by weakening the effectiveness of the entire international system. Lastly, the reform of the veto is a necessary thing, as the veto affects not just the UNSC, but other UN bodies as well. First of all, the veto causes a lack of international justice by allowing countries and war criminals to escape prosecution from the International Criminal Court. Russia and China have blocked investigations of Syria to the ICC. Hence, Syria has remained scot-free for this whole time, and investigations and sanctions have never fully materialized. The ICC heavily depends on UNSC referrals and approvals, and this means that the P5 get to selectively choose who receives international justice while at the same time protecting themselves and their allies from the international law. The veto, therefore, not only weakens the UNSC, but the entire system of international law as a whole. Second, the veto allows the P5 to control recognition within the United Nations General Assembly. Taiwan and Palestine both have faced barriers with recognition, as China and the US have constantly threatened or even used the veto to stop their recommendations by the UNSC. This demonstrates how the veto's influence extends beyond the UNSC. Instead of all countries being treated as equals in the UN recognition within the UN can depend on the political interests of the P5. Finally, the veto allows the P5 to influence who becomes the Secretary General of the United Nations. Boutros Ghali was an Egyptian Secretary General who received support from nearly every member of the UNSC. However, a single US veto stopped his second term because they had political disagreements with him. Once again, the veto has allowed one powerful country to override the will of the majority. This demonstrates that the veto's influence spreads throughout multiple UN institutions, not just the Security Council. Nonetheless, some will still argue that the veto is a necessary evil, as first, it preserves global stability by preventing conflict between major powers. Supporters of the veto believe that without the veto, major powers like the US or Russia would more likely abandon diplomacy and immediately resort to direct military confrontation if their interests are threatened, which will assure mutually assured destruction and cause global catastrophe. Both sides agree that stopping a large-scale war between countries is a good thing. However, this argument still ignores the fact that we are sacrificing global stability in smaller conflicts just to protect the larger powers. Patrick Stewart points out the fact that many countries have increasingly viewed the UNSC as ineffective over time, as the veto continuously prevents intervention in regional crises. While the veto might be able to reduce tension between superpowers, it simultaneously paralyzes the UNSC in lesser conflicts where millions of civilians still end up suffering. A system that protects powerful nations yet abandons the vulnerable ones cannot truly be called a mechanism for peace. On the other hand, some critics argue that the veto reflects the reality of politics and ensures the participation of the P5 within the UN. The reason why the League of Nations failed was mainly because the countries in it lacked commitment and none of them really wanted to support it. And supporters argue that the veto gives the P5 an incentive to continue on their military, financial, and political support to the organization. Both sides do agree that the support of major powers was a necessary thing during the UNSC's creation in 1945. However, the fact is that experts argue that global power has changed dramatically since 1945. Yet the UNSC still operates under an outdated structure designed for the post-World War II era. Today, the UN possesses worldwide legitimacy with 193 member states, meaning that the organization no longer depends on granting unlimited privileges to just 5 countries in order to survive. The veto may have once secured participation, but now it secures paralysis. Lastly, supporters of the veto argue that it acts as a safeguard against reckless or biased resolutions within the UNSC. Both sides agree that the Council does need a mechanism to prevent reckless and biased solutions that may have the potential to worsen conflicts instead of solving them. Unfortunately, however, in practice, the veto does not function as a neutral safeguard, but rather as a tool that the P5 can use to further their political interests. Experts argue that the veto has shifted from being a tool meant to preserve international stability into a privilege used to protect individual agendas of the P5. Rather than preventing irresponsible resolutions, the veto frequently blocks necessary humanitarian action, investigations into war crimes, and ceasefire agreements. In theory, the veto could protect international stability, but in reality, it often protects political allies instead of innocent civilians. A safeguard that repeatedly enables injustice no longer serves its intended function. Throughout this thesis, the many ways the veto has negatively affected the UNSC have been explored, starting off with how the veto constantly paralyzes the UNSC during international crises, endangering every country on Earth. Continuing on with how the veto causes the UNSC to lose a majority of its legitimacies. And finally, how the veto affects not just the UNSC, but other bodies connected to the UN as well. Imagine for a minute a world where conflict is no longer prolonged due to political deadlock, and where international law is actually taken seriously. A world where all countries, regardless of power, are treated equally by said international laws. A world where the organizations responsible for our safety and the safety of regular people are like us are able to act decisively in times of need. This is the world that the UN was supposed to bring upon. However, all of this is still unfeasible, just an imaginary scenario because the veto is what prevents this brighter future. To reform the veto is not to simply replace or strip the power of the P5. It is a way to restore the legitimacy and credibility of the United Nations, a way for the UNSC to finally become the effective organization it was designed to be. If the international community really wants to follow the core values of justice, equality, and peace that the UN was built upon, then it's time for the veto's influence over the international community to be completely changed. But what can we do? As normal people, we can spread the word, as many are still completely unaware of the situation within the international community. And for those who truly are willing to fight for change, to join the UN and change it from within. Only when enough political pressure is created will the UNSC be able to reform. And only when the UNSC reforms can we live in this brighter future. Thank you.
Good job. Thank you, Gabe. Our panelists today are Miss Anita and Miss Johan.
First one.
Let's start with Miss Johan.
Okay. Thanks,
That's
Ray.
fine.
Hi.
Hi, Miss.
So how do you feel now? Is it a little bit of relief
Oh, boleh kata.
or more nervous than before you started?
I think less nervous. I think like, can I scream? Let it all out.
Not
Let it all
yet,
out.
maybe.
Okay.
All right. First, I'd like to comment on your thesis. I think the topic is very heavy and challenging, I think. But when I read your thesis, it's very rich with data, shows that you work very hard to make your thesis very extensive research. So great job. So it's really a good one. But I can help to read a lot of emotions. So here, very emotional. I think is there a kind of personal vengeance or something here?
Okay. Thank you for the question, Miss. So essentially, this whole thing started in about 8th grade when I was just hanging out online, and then out of nowhere I saw the Russians have invaded Ukraine or something like that. And then I realized, hey, wait a minute, this doesn't sound good. And then the more I realized how bad the situation was, I was questioning what is the UN doing when all of this is happening? And so yeah, that happens, and then we continue on to about 11th or 10th grade, where Israel and then commits an attack. Gaza commits, the Hamas commits an attack on Israel, and then another conflict happens. And then at that point, I was just even more confused, as I thought we had an organization designed to prevent all of this, and yet nothing is being done by it. And so in 12th grade, when I was picking my topics, I just remembered of a funny meme, the UNinvolved in conflict meme. It was a photo of a UN soldier standing beside involved in conflict. Yeah, it makes sense. So basically, the more I researched about this, the more I realized how stupid this system is. Because this system was very clearly designed to benefit only the powerful powers of the world and not actually prevent conflict around the world. So yeah, that's why there's a lot of emotion. And like, for example, the story in the beginning, that's actually kind of based on a true story because many soldiers have realized like, well, as they're searching for identification, they find photos of the soldiers' own families and then remember that they just killed a father or even a mother that had children and of an entire family that they just left behind. A single bullet was able to do all of this damage and nothing has been done by the UNSC about it. So yeah, that's my problem with the UNSC.
Yeah, that's good. That's very critical of you. That's great. So, if you can summarize why this veto system should be reformed, very shortly to anyone who has never heard about this before, how would you say that?
I'd start off by describing what the UN is, obviously. I'd say that the UNSC is an organization that was created or designed to protect other countries from conflict. However, it was built with a system called the veto, which essentially allows 5 countries to choose or stop anything from happening if they don't like what's going on. And so, because 5 countries have a lot of different opinions, the UN has been stopped constantly from doing actions because if a single country disagrees with the resolution, then the entire process just completely stops. Hence why the UNSC is inactive due to the veto.
So, you have problems with the countries in the P5 or the veto system itself?
I think I have problems with all 3 of them. It's like kind of beef, because essentially like the countries are the ones who enable this. No, the UNSC is what enables this along with the veto. But at the same time, it's the countries who refuse to change the system. Like, even though veto reforms have been proposed, none of them have passed because, again, the P5 just veto any reform. So the veto can't be reformed because the veto is protecting itself. It's like a cycle.
So, do you think, in your opinion, based on your research, if we change the P5 members, will the veto system be better? Let's say one of the third world countries, let's say not the original P5.
In my opinion, the veto system is gonna still be flawed because the veto system overall is flawed. It's very flawed. Like a single vote, it shouldn't have the power to completely stop the entire vote. So even if, for example, we replaced every country with like Indonesia, no, jangan Indonesia, African countries and South American countries, nothing would still go because every single country has their own national priority, and so they wouldn't actually let any resolution that would go against their beliefs to be passed.
Can I ask one more question? Okay. So then, should we reform, in your opinion, should we reform the veto system or completely abolish it?
Now, the best case scenario right now, at least, is to reform the veto system because, as I mentioned, 3 of the P5 members, the US, Russia, and China, are somewhat unwilling for the veto to be completely removed. And so, by changing it small, like step by step, there might be a better way, like it might encourage the P5 to push even more reforms on the veto because completely abolishing it right now might be unrealistic since that will cause like the UNSC to basically scramble. The organization falls apart overall, basically. Because it's always operated on a veto system. By completely abolishing it, you're getting rid of like an entire system of law that has existed for, I think, over a century. Yeah.
Last question. If somebody should change the system, who do you think it should be?
Oh, excuse me, like a single person or like a country?
Could be both or any. You will?
No.
Realistically, who do you think should work together or should do something to make the system better?
Realistically speaking, I might suggest the France and UK because both of them are the most agreeable on like the veto is a bad idea and should be reformed. And both countries have also supported veto reform, like, for example, stopping it during actual humanitarian crises and expanded permanent membership for the countries who don't have representation. So my choice personally would be the UK and France. But like, if for a single person, I can't really think of anyone because everyone just wants to further their national interest. So,
okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, Miss Anita.
Hello. Hi, Gabriel.
I
Hi. It's very interesting topic because actually in history class, seventh graders, I also taught them about multilateral corporations, and one of them is UN, ASEAN. So it's very interesting to see that you're very interested in this topic, yeah. Which also, it's one of my major in international relations.
oh
Yeah. And I heard from Mr. Mano is your thesis advisor.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. He's my senior, so
oh
yeah. All right. Okay. So, yeah, I think veto. I think seventh graders also already know that is very unfair, which I personally agree it's unfair. However, my first question is, based on your thesis, yeah, because just like what you say before in Nara show that Stalin asked for these veto things, what do you think can make the P5 stay in the UN if there is no veto?
Thank you for the question, Miss Anita. So essentially, back then I mentioned in my refutatio that originally the organization did need the P5 to survive because, well, they were a completely new organization with only about 20 to 30 member states. And so officially recognition, they were nobodies in the international community. However, today there are over 193 countries within the UN. And if from what my understanding is that if a country isn't recognized in the UN, then we don't recognize it as a country. Because I mean like not literally, but you can say that because like politically speaking, the UN is already like the big boy of the international community. It decides if your country is an official country or doesn't. And then not only that, it has multiple sub-bodies like the UNSC, but other things like UNESCO, UNHRC, blah, blah, blah. So essentially, like the organization, I don't think the P5, it's a completely opposite situation. It's not the organization who needs the P5 now. It's rather the P5 who still need to work with the organization overall.
That's
Ooh.
interesting. Ooh. So, hold up. So, if UNSC, let's just say P5 don't want to join UN, and then as you can see, US president is very
Oh,
eccentric
I'm up.
by this choice. So again, what do you think can stop them from not sending the nuclear? Because like that's partially it. Because in the UNSC, there's the veto, and then that's the thing that can stop power, like the ruin of global stability right now. So without it, and then you say P5 now need the UN, and then let's just say P5 don't want to be in the UN, what can stop them from ruining this global stability?
Well, mom. Oh my God. So, in my opinion, like, sure, if the P5 left the UN, they could go to war with each other. But the thing is, I think they've already learned the lesson in the Cold War that going to war with nukes and everything is just mutually assured destruction. And from what I understand, it's a highly unrealistic scenario that the US or Russia are willing to go together into nuclear war because, like, if both countries are destroyed, then they also lose the war, technically speaking. And so, like, even if the UNSC can't really stop them from doing this, we've already seen that the US technically doesn't even follow the UNSC because they just left it, right? So technically speaking, the president, the US already is aware of how badly a full-on war between two major powers would go. So I don't really think that conflict will escalate to that level even if they leave the UNSC. Since, yeah.
So then you agree then global stability is better, and then proxy war is okay because now everything is fine. I mean, in a sense that global stability exists, meanwhile proxy war is still going on. But like as long as the big country don't go to war, so is it fine?
No, I'm more talking about that like global stability will still remain the same if the P5 leave the UNSC. But the UNSC itself needs to be able to protect the smaller conflicts. Because like in my third refutatio, I mentioned the fact that people see the UNSC as like the veto as a way for the P5. No, that was my proof one. They see the veto as a way for the P5 to like keep diplomacy together, like not completely abandoned to direct military refute attacks. But wait. Okay, so my point is that essentially, if the UNSC should focus on these tiny conflicts and not worry about the possible major conflicts, because the powerful countries, are already aware that these major conflicts are most likely not going to be a good idea for both countries. So, like, how do I say this? Essentially, you can say it.
What? Hold up. Can you just summarize whatever you say before in like 2 sentences, probably?
Okay, sentence 1. The UNSC should work more to stop conflicts in regional crises. And second of all, even like you're trying to say that global stability is still good even with the P5 right now, right? But I'm just trying to say that even if the P5 were not under the leash of the UNSC, they wouldn't resort to direct conflict like World War III, nuclear war, because essentially it's a bad idea for everyone in that scenario.
Okay.
Okay.
So technically, all right, my next question probably asking, so what is the purpose of UNSC again?
The UNSC is supposed to preserve security and peace around the world and stop emerging conflicts from happening and not prolonging them like it is right now.
Okay. So I think isn't it pretty successful? Because like it's region, not global. So isn't it working at least?
In my opinion, no, because like again, the Russia-Ukraine war, like a lot of instances, a lot of dead civilians, a lot of dead soldiers, and the war is still going on despite the fact that multiple resolutions have been made to stop it. And then we can see in like Syria civil war that ended like after 20 years, and the amount of casualties that it caused was overwhelming to say the least. So I'd argue that what? Yeah. Like, I'm just trying to say that that's the point.
Yeah, okay. Okay. Now, my next question. So sometimes human intervention create more suffering in the country that they intervene. More like they cannot govern the country itself, and then more people dying. So what do you think about that?
So, just to be clear, are you saying like if the UNSC were to intervene in the wars, then more people would die because the UN soldiers get killed, like that stuff?
No, it's because sometimes, this is not, I have to be honest, but this is not UNSC decision. Do you know the invasion of Afghanistan after after the 9/11 attack?
That was NATO, right?
You,
No, that was just the US. Yeah, that was just
US, but like US act under the Article 51 of self-defense under the UN, and UNSC also did not say anything about that, right?
Yeah.
So that human intervention, to stop the suffering of Afghan people, isn't it create more, more casualties by the humanitarian intervention? Because like how the UN will stop the war anyway? Because like they will intervene, killing who? And then, like more killing, right?
Oh.
What do you think?
So I think the answer to that is most likely that when I'm talking about the UN intervention, I'm more talking about like the two countries, the US and like Afghanistan, sorted out more diplomatically instead of directly going to war, or at least the US-Afghan war doesn't last as long as it actually did, because that risk like killed thousands of people. Like you can even see the effects. There's multiple US veterans suffer and the Afghans suffered. So like had the UN intervened earlier, the conflict might have been able to stop faster and risk less lives. Now, conflict is probably impossible to completely stop because it's like a natural human thing. But the UNSC can stop conflict from continuing to escalate, and stop it early before the conflict actually becomes worse and kills.
Okay.
Yeah.
Chill out. Chill. All right. My next question. Probably, I don't know. Do I still have time? All right. Yeah. Why don't just to make it all equal, let's just say, why don't just disband UNSC and make General Assembly as a binding organization? Like a UNGAS binding.
So what you're suggesting is just get rid of all the UNSC and just make the UN the one.
Because like UNSC have only 15 members, right?
Yeah.
So why not like GA with 193 and then but binding so it have consequences?
Yeah, honestly speaking, I think that's a good idea. Like, the 15-member system is kind of flawed because, once again, there's only 10 actual countries who have have a chance to vote, and at the same time, their votes don't even matter because of the veto. And so, like, I think, but the problem with that would be that the country involved, like, for example, the US goes to war with Afghanistan, then Afghanistan and the US are part of the discussions, and then so they might, like, continually disagree with each other. And if, like, for example, the UN passes the vote like, hey, I think we're gonna send an invasion to Afghanistan, then Afghanistan is gonna complain like, this is unfair. Like, why are we the ones being invaded? Blah, 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 blah. But the thing is, I think like, if a majority of countries agree that Afghanistan was the one at fault, then Afghanistan is the one at fault, instead of like having a system where only the US gets to decide who is at fault while the smaller countries can't do anything. You get it?
So you will need still UNSC, but without veto. What you're saying is that?
Oh.
I don't understand. To be honest.
I'm trying to say that like a more fair vote would be including like more countries within the UNSC. So not just 15 members.
Not just 15. Added
Yeah.
into how many?
Yeah.
Half.
Now, I don't know. Maybe like someone who takes international relations can take the risk.
Okay. Maybe. So researchers say that if without veto, they would say that not now the UNSC decide 9 majority, right? 9 country agreed and yaudah with the veto. However, the researchers say 12 but without veto. So probably could be. My last question, if there is no veto, what will stop the P5 country to not dominate the UNSC? And still bully the small country.
Okay, so that's one of the biggest questions that I already answered actually, because okay. So essentially, what's stopping them is the fact that these smaller countries can still somewhat band together. Like, for example, the U.S. and China are most definitely not gonna get along within the discussions, and so there's no way Trump's gonna go like, Xi Jinping, let's be friends, and so like they're not gonna be able to. I'm just saying that the possibility of them overpowering is possible, but it is mostly unlikely because the smaller nations are more neutral to each other and can work together to overpower the overpowering. Ooh. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay lah. Yeah. All right.
Okay. One more question. One more question. It does seem a little strange that the P5 is a bunch of countries that were probably dominant after World War II, and there could still be additional countries in there, and you wonder, why are some countries not included? But hasn't the honorable president from the United States proposed a new organization for peace? What about that idea, changing it all out with something from the what do they call it? The
Board of
That's
Peace.
it.
So I think the problem with the Board of Peace is that, first of all, Trump is the one running it. So like that's not a good idea in the first place. Second of all, I think since the Board of Peace is still like such a new concept, I don't think we can make conclusions about it yet and how its effectiveness. Since like literally, I think it's been like 3 months. They've done absolutely nothing. Like I mean the UN, at least they have like UNESCO and UNHRC to like deal with other international things. But the Board of Peace is just a fake UNSC Chinese ripoff, Yeah. So like the Board of Peace just doesn't work in theory.
Okay, thank you. I feel like we should all just go home. No, just kidding. We got one more big one left.